for all things Halloween. This is Hauntformer, and I'm also Mac Ralston. I am a writer. I am a Creepypasta author myself, as a matter of fact, and come next month at the recording of this video, I'll be a novelist. I have an anthology and a novella currently on Amazon, and I'm self-publishing my first novel in October. And I say all that to say, not that I'm trying to be snooty or anything, but just that writing is a big part of my life, and it's important to me, and I think to not only critique your own work, but evaluate the work of others and enjoy it and talk about it, I think is really important. Last summer, I started a podcast, loosely, called Creepypasta Critique, where I took a pretty famous creepypasta, the Ronald McDonald House, which has been narrated by all the big, creepypasta YouTubers on the web, and I kind of dissected it. I had listened to it for years when I was a kid, and I went back, listened to it, read it, whatever, and I discussed it at length. Actually, it was like a 20-something minute podcast, and I think it did okay. I wasn't expecting it to do very well. The creepypasta videos are not my bread and butter for my channel, but I do them anyway because I enjoy it and it's my channel. And I actually got a response on that video from the author of the story, praising the video for talking about the story and actually being fairly generous with my critiques. But I really liked doing that, and I wanted to bring it back. It's been over a year, and I just wasn't feeling the podcast format as well, so I thought I would bring it into video format and just kind of do this casual discussion. Now, this might not be the type of video for you, and I totally get that. You may not even be a creepypasta enjoyer. Personally, I love the craft of writing creepypastas. I think it's a tricky one. And, I've written about 40-something that you can find on the wiki, and it's been an interesting journey. It's led to me working on my own books and such beyond, of course, creepypasta, because I think creepypasta is somewhat of a narrow concept. There's a lot you can do with it, but not all of the stories that you write are fit for the creepypasta template, so to speak. But I can recall every October season listening to a ton of random internet stories, and I love it, and it's an annual tradition for me. It's one of my favorite highlights of the Halloween season, personally, because you can watch all of the horror movies you want to death, but all of the horror movies are from people who could afford to make them, usually studios or filmmakers, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love horror movies, but these internet stories are from just everyday people telling interesting stories. Some of them land, some of them don't. That's the gamble, but I value putting the time in, I guess, to hear out these creators, as a lot have heard my stories out. And people have been critical of mine, too. And I think you have to be able to take criticism as an artist. So today, I'm going to be talking about not one, not even two, but 3 creepypastas, 2 kind of classic ones, and then a new one that I actually just recently heard the narration of from Mr. Creepypasta, the narration channel. And I wanted to talk about that one as well. Even though it's a newer one and probably not as popular, I had some stuff to say about it. And so here we are. And I'm just trying this out again, because why not? I like taking some swings on the channel. So here we go. The 3 stories we're going to talk about are the Harbinger Experiment, I think is how you pronounce it, the Harbinger Experiment, the Strangest security tape I've ever seen, and Prayerbot, which is the newer one, and we'll get to that one at the end. But the first 2 are pretty infamous in creepypasta lore. Not as much as maybe, I don't know, your typical Jeff the Killer or Smile Dog or Slender Man or whatever. Not even maybe like Laughing or Eyeless Jack. You have all the big faces, or for Slender Man, lack thereof. but you have all the big kind of iconic faces. I'm not going to really... I could touch on those at some point, but I want to kind of look at these other ones. Now, I know that Meat Canyon has a channel of his own where he and... his name's escaping me, this other YouTuber. Nope, not going to get it. Anyway, they talk about a lot of classic creepypastas. I don't know how much... Obviously, they go in depth. I don't know what they particularly are talking about, like, story-wise. Here, I just kind of want to take an overview of the story and just give some feedback and, you know, just share my thoughts on it. So, out of these three, I'm most familiar with the Harbinger Experiment. It's one that I've read, listened to, whatever, multiple times. It's one that a favorite YouTuber of mine, Hoodlum's Revenge, has talked about in length as being a favorite of his. I don't know if that opinion's changed on his end. But that story, along with the Russian sleep experiment, really scratched the itch for me in terms of the government experiment type of story, to the point where my first novel is actually about a underground type of government experiment. So I'm very excited to, you know, throw my hat in the ring, so to speak, when it comes to that subgenre of horror. Russian sleep experiment can also be one I talk about in the future, but the Harbinger Experiment is a little less well known, but I think it still makes its rounds in the creepypasta community, so to speak. In a nutshell, it is about this medical doctor that gets a job from this sketchy figure that he calls Zimmerman. And Zimmerman is trying to prove the existence of the paranormal through an underground experiment in which there are, I believe, 3 subjects who are supposed to test... It's something with sleep, or no, it's isolation, excuse me. They're trying to test isolation, but that's a cover-up. The real implications are paranormal. And he does this type of strange occult ritual, and kind of one by one, these test subjects turn into these mutated, bizarre creatures. And Tiny Tim plays, and spoilers for all the stories, unfortunately. At the end of the story, our main character escapes and actually closes this lid that seals all of the rest of the crew in with the creatures to protect humanity from the beasts. And the end is that he can hear Tiny Tim outside of his home, implying that these creatures or whatever was playing Tiny Tim. I don't know if the creatures were holding a boombox or if they just kind of emit it through their skin or if it's some paranormal thing. It implies that they're coming for him and that they've made it out, obviously. It was a story that I really loved a lot when I was younger. And when I kind of reread it with a critical ear, there were more flaws that I noticed. Overall, I still like the premise. Obviously, I kind of have a bias here. I like the underground, creepy government stuff. But take that aside, the idea of a scientist trying to prove himself to the academic community by kind of this ritual and creating these creatures is interesting. Now, the execution is questionable. I know the best type of horror is riding the line between what you reveal and what you don't. If you spoil too much, it turns into a lore dump. And if you don't give any information, you don't have a great semblance of a story. So a lot of writing is strategically when you reveal certain information to the audience. There's no way of knowing why the subjects turn into these creatures, but I feel like there would be a more acceptable way of getting across a belief in the paranormal to the academic community rather than turning 3 people into creatures, because one, I don't even know what the creatures are. There's not much to it. Obviously, it's some type of Lovecraftian, strange, occult thing, which I can get behind because I love Lovecraft and a lot of his work. But I don't know. It just it kind of comes out of left field. And I think maybe when you think of the paranormal, you think maybe more of ghosts or living dead or something of that sort. And they're just these, like, I believe they're even like winged creatures. And it's just a strange thing. And I get maybe it's going for that, but I didn't particularly follow the thread in the story for that. And the Tiny Tim thing, they play Tiptoe Through the Tulips throughout the story kind of as a bad omen that the creatures are coming. But it felt kind of like shoehorned in for the sake of spooks. Like, oh, it was in Insidious, and Insidious is scary, so let's put it in this story. I don't know if that was the author's intention, but it does feel, again, like it's coming out of left field. Why does Tiptoe Through the Tulips play when winged creatures are transformed from test subjects? It's very bizarre. It's kind of like a weird Chex Mix of ideas. And I think the framework is nice. And I think the idea of this scientist hiring a medical professional is believable. There were things that I bought in the story, and there's obviously some dirt and some blackmail on this particular character. So I like that angle of it. And there are a couple of little typos, but I'm not going to really nitpick. That's not my focus here. It's really on those big picture elements that I think could have been handled a bit better, or, you know, allocated more time to different aspects of the story rather than the angle that it went at the very end. But with that said, still an iconic story. And I should say, if any of the authors of these said stories are watching this video, first of all, the criticism is only to the stories. It's not necessarily to the author themselves. I've gotten plenty of criticism to my stories, but I don't take it personally. I try to separate, you know, the art from the artist. But two, it doesn't mean you're a bad writer because there are just disagreements creatively. So always remember that. And your work has influenced myself on a personal level and brought enjoyment to a lot of people. So pat yourself on the back for that. The second story that I want to talk about is the strangest security tape I've ever seen. And this one I think I've only heard or read maybe one other time before a recent reread. And it's definitely a great premise. It has a really good hook at the end. And it has to do with time loops and time travel. I've never seen the film Looper, but I would imagine it's maybe a horrifying version of that particular type of story. And what I appreciate about the story, unlike the other two that I'm going to be talking about, or that I already did and are about to, is that it doesn't rely on the typical scare fare that maybe you would come to expect, you know? There are no ghouls or goblins, no blood, no self-death. I can't say the word, but self-death is a popular creepypasta trope. There isn't really much of that in the story. It mostly has to do with the bizarre, and it's almost science fiction in a sense. And I quite like that. I also love small, grounded stuff when it comes to horror media, and having it take place in this little rinky-dink gas station and these guys looking through these tapes and they're trying to catch a thief and they discover something strange is really good. So kudos to the author when it comes to that. I quite like I will say there is one instance where it felt a little cheaty, and that's where Jeremy is kind of looking into the camera smiling. Bit of a trope, but I think it sort of works when you bring into question the character of Jeremy, what his intentions are. We learn kind of a dark underbelly of a backstory for this character. And so there are questions as to his motives here. And I almost wonder if Jeremy himself is in a time loop. He's stealing, gasoline from the gas station, or oil. And we find out that his parents actually died in a house fire. So I wonder if he is constantly looping this murder that he may or may not have committed. And by extension, can trap other people in time loops too. It asks a lot of interesting questions. This is one that I think rides that line really, really well between giving the audience or the reader enough information, but not too much. You know, you don't want to spoil the fun. But all in all, this one was a lot more impressive upon reread. The final story that I just recently listened to on Mr. Creepypasta's channel, which I always, try to separate a bit the word on the paper or on the screen as opposed to a narrator, because they can change meaning based on inflection and things. You got to take that into account. But this final one is called Prayerbot, and the title hooked me. I don't always, I loathe entirely the title tropes that go on in the creepypasta community. When you have stuff like, I was a security guard and this is what I saw, or I worked for a haunted zoo. I don't like those titles. They're clickbaity, and usually you know exactly what you're getting. I just don't care for it. But Prayerbot was a very interesting story title that gave me enough to chew on to know sort of it was going to be something religious and about, I assumed, AI or robotic, and while also being enticing enough to click on. You have to have the two things. You got to hit the commercial stuff and the artistic stuff, and I thought it rode that line pretty well. I am a big fan of the religious horror stories, and I'm also a fan of the technological ones, so this was kind of a great marriage of those two concepts. And it started out really strong. In fact, one of the strongest openings to a creepypasta that I've heard in quite a while. The premise was excellent, and had it maybe landed better, this might have been amongst my favorites. But sort of like Harbinger Experiment, it falls into the trap of trying to do some tropes. And you have self-death, and you have the AI turning evil a bit and being like selfish and wanting to be worshipped. It started so believable, and it lost for me that suspension of disbelief, and it became almost camp, which I suppose I could appreciate in its own regard, like a comic book. But it was doing so well at the beginning that it was sad to me when it kind of dropped the ball at the end. You have these scientists, or, they're more of like app developers, but scientists, and they code this program to answer prayers from any religious sect or group or denomination. I love that setup because it kind of raises a lot of interesting real-life application questions about what if this was a thing that we did. It maybe already exists, praying to a robot and seeing what it says that your God would say. Very fascinating stuff, and I thought it was gonna go in a, I don't want to say smarter direction because I'm not implying the author's dumb, but in a more clever direction, maybe in a more sinister direction with how AI interprets the human understanding of the divine. Really like theoretical, theological, philosophical questions that just become more of like, evil robot, I'm gonna make you self-destroy. And I don't know, it lost me by the end, which is very unfortunate. I actually left a comment on the video just kind of being like, man, this had such a great hook, and it lost me, which is too bad. But kudos to the author for having a great setup, man. That was really well done. And I would love to see that premise maybe reworked, or, I don't know, something in that realm. I love that groove of the technological and the religious. In fact, I have a story myself that I'm going to be working on in the coming months or whenever that also has to do with those themes. So all in all, each of these stories was entertaining throughout. Some of them dropped the ball more than others, obviously, but I think you have three very talented authors here that I'd be curious to see their continued work, if they have continued the work. I know especially the Security Tape 1 and the Experiment have been out for quite some time, so I'm assuming there might be a back catalog of work from these authors, which I'll put links to the stories and such in the description. And the Prayerbot one, I really hope that they can find their groove with the theming that they like to include in the stories, because I thought it was very enticing to me. And obviously they have somewhat of a fascination, one similar to myself. So there you have it. Creepypasta Critique, finally episode 2. Do you like this series, or do you think it's stupid? Be honest with me, it's fine. If you're a person who just discovered my channel because you like creepypastas, I admitted at the beginning of this video, this is not my bread and butter. However, I love it. And if I can have an excuse to make more content like this by more people watching videos like this, then by all means, I will. Trust me. I'll see you in the next video, creepies. And remember, for all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer.